at the Adelphi Hotel, which was segregated, just to break through barriers. These are young guys. I mean, imagine the kind of guts that took. The Beatles told me they weren't going to play the Gator Bowl in Jacksonville because it was being segregated. And sure enough, for the first time ever in Southern stadiums, a stadium was integrated. First time ever, Southeastern Conference of American Football became integrated because of the Beatles. So anyway, the story takes you to so many different places. Hamburg, Germany. And I'm not going to go into detail about Hamburg except to tell you that they lived in part of a bathroom in an adult cinema. We used to call them art movies. They were just, more sophisticated movies. They hung out with the wrong kind of working ladies and got sick, and their manager had to give them penicillin shots every few days. They were drunk with pills. They were beaten up by goons from nightclubs because they didn't play long enough. And guess who they found? They found a man. His name is Horst Fascher, who is a former boxer who actually killed a man and went to prison. He had a fight with a sailor over a woman. He knocked him out, and the man died. He went to prison. He protected them. He loved them. He's 87 years old, 83 years old today. He still talks about his days with the Beatles. So here you got Paul McCartney and Pete Best, the first drummer, almost arrested for allegedly setting a fire to a stage in Hamburg, which they didn't do. John Lennon almost arrested for stealing a harmonica from the music store, which he did. Ringo wasn't with him. He was playing for another group. Pete Best and Paul are deported. George Harrison is deported from Germany because he's underage. He's 17. He's not supposed to be working in any job. And it's disgraceful, and they are so embarrassed. And they come back to Liverpool, and they decide to break up. Not only once, but on 10 separate occasions in December, they talk about breaking up. And then something remarkable happened. England has a small holiday called Boxing Day, and it's 2 days after Christmas. And on December 27th, 1960, they were invited to a little hall about as big as this room. And most of their music at the time was dance music. And these kids are dancing, and they're really dancing, and they're in a frenzy. And all of a sudden, they rush the stage. Now, remember, the Beatles were dressed in leather jackets. You can take a look at the middle of the book, you'll see what they looked like then. They were pretty low end in terms of their appearances, and they rushed the stage. So all of a sudden, they got an offer from promoters. Instead of being paid $8 per concert for all of them, somebody offered them $10 to perform there next week. And then it was 12, and then it was 14. So this little concert, what they would call small beer in Liverpool, changed their whole outlook on themselves. And then there were the people. There are about 20 people who created and made their careers. They are totally forgotten in history. One of them is a man with two first names, Bill Harry. Bill Harry wrote a newspaper called Merseybeat. By the time he was 18, he was making a couple of $1,000s a month, selling this newspaper to young people all over the city. And Bill Harry rigged a poll for the Beatles. The poll said, who's the best band in Liverpool? And so Bill Harry and his future wife decided, you know something, they're stuffing the ballot box, let's just make the Beatles #1. So he rigged a poll, and the headline, seen all over England, said Beatles #1 in Northern England. He rigged a poll for them, but they probably were going to be #1 anyway. There was Sam Leach, who now spends his days in a bar called The Grapes, where he signs his books on the weekends. That's how he makes a living. Very sad. Their first promoter, the guy who told them when they were 17, you're going to be bigger than Elvis. And of course, Brian Epstein, who made them over. Brian Epstein told me in 1964, Larry, the children of the 21st century will be listening to the Beatles. And I said, really? The 21st century? That's a long way off. So 50 years later, it truly has happened. And Derek Taylor and Tony Barrow, two press guys, geniuses. The way they manipulated the media and what they did for them. So they had a lot of help. And one of the greatest people that helped them was Pete Best, their first drummer. Everybody sort of dismisses Pete Best as a footnote to history, but I'm going to end the conversation with this. And then tell you why I was a bad boy in front of Paul McCartney. Pete Best was the most popular Beatle from 1960 through 1962. He was on the cover of every magazine. If the young ladies see him in pictures in this book, just an adorable guy, very quiet, sort of a James Dean type of character. The guys didn't like him. They just didn't like him. He was too quiet for them. In the spring of 1962, he went to a concert at the Manchester Playhouse. And Brian Epstein reserved a luxury bus to take all the families to see them in person. It's a very nice gesture. But Mona Best, Pete's mother, couldn't make it because she was nursing a young child who she had. She was 40 with the 20-year-old roadie, Neil Aspinall. And so Mona wasn't there, and Pete was alone. During the concert, it was fanaticism at its best. And when the concert was over, they couldn't get the guys out. I mean, the girls were just running, and the guys and everybody. It was just total emotions. So here's what happens. In the end of this concert, the three of them get out of there, John, George, and Paul, and Pete's trapped on the stage. The police put him in a hamper, much like you might see in a hotel or motel where you put your linens, okay? He's in the hamper, and a bunch of girls rush the hamper, and one of them takes out scissors, not as sharp scissors, but a pair of scissors, and she slashes through the hamper and tries to cut a piece of his shirt. Unfortunately, not in a fatal way, of course, she stabs him. So he's now bleeding, and he's terrified. He gets on the bus, and he's shaking, and he's not that kind of, he doesn't adore this kind of attention. And he's shaking, visibly shaking. And the man described to me, of course I never met him because he died so many years ago, the father of Paul McCartney, they called him Uncle Jim, goes up to Pete Best, grabs the lapels of his shirt, and says, "Pete, are you happy now? You've showed up the boys again." 30 days later, he was gone. And when you read the real story of why he was let go, you're going to be very stunned, because the band could have easily been Pete, John, Paul, and George, or maybe Paul last. And so this is the story of the reality. There's a lot of betrayal in this book. There's a lot of love. There's a lot of glory. There's a lot of tremendous coincidence. And it reads, it was just the pick of the week in the newspaper that I find to be a very hip paper, Christian Science Monitor. Great articles, especially since they like my book. I like it even more. The Library Journal calls it one of the greatest page turners in Beatles history. And I think that when you read it, you'll have a good time with it. It reads quickly, it's dramatic, and it reads like a novel. As I said, you couldn't make it up. Finally, I want to tell you the last two stories of why Paul McCartney thought that I lived a secret life. They had a big party at a big mansion in Hollywood, and they called me up at my hotel, and they asked me to come over. No tape recorder, just show up, because there's not enough men here, but a lot of young Hollywood actresses. It was very nice. Paul McCartney's sitting on the other side of the room with Peggy Lipton, who is the mother, for the older folks in here, of Rashida Jones, who was in Parks and Recreation. Peggy Lipton was a star in a series called The Mod Squad, which you and I will remember. They were cozying up to each other, and there's all these women in the place, executives. The celebrities included Frank Sinatra and Bob Hope, Jack Palance, the great actor who did his push-ups at the Academy Awards, Shelley Winters, people from that time, Sandra Dee. I called my father. I said, I can't believe this, Dad. He says, "Watch your back. The Beatles are a menace to society." He was always worried for me. Anyway, so this young lady comes up to me, who's very perky, really perky. And she says, "What do you do?" And I told him I was a reporter traveling with him. And she said she was an actress. And I said, "What kind of acting do you do?" And at that point, she started screaming. And the screaming was a guttural scream. If you heard the scream right now, you would have called 911. It was an amazing scream, and she did it for about a minute, and I was trembling. I didn't know what to do. McCartney looked over at me, And John Lennon, what's going on? Well, she whispered to me, but nobody else could hear. I just starred in a movie with Vincent Price called The House of Wax. I scream in horror movies. I'm the only one who heard that. And before I could explain myself, McCartney came over to me and says, I know that you live a secret life. The other episode that occurred was very funny, and it's something I'll always remember. In 1965, they stayed in the Benedict Canyon, which is a beautiful canyon outside of Beverly Hills. And they each had a room leading out to a swimming pool. Okay? So they called me up at the Beverly Rodeo Hotel, which is on Rodeo Drive, which, by the way, was empty then. Just had this one hotel. If I saw the for sale signs for property, I would have been a gazillionaire. And I came over, and they said, bring a bathing suit or else we're going to throw you in. So I didn't bring a bathing suit, and they threatened to throw me in. And John said, go to my room, and you'll see there's a couple of bathing suits we have purchased for us. And he and I were, at that time, were about the same size. And I went in there, I took off my clothes, put on my bathing suit and my shirt over, and I decided to freshen up and opened up the bathroom. Well, here I am, this problem I have with this imagery. I opened up the door, and this very bronze woman, and I'm talking about bronze woman with beautiful black hair, is there with a towel around her. And like an absolute idiot, I put out my hand to shake her hand. Okay? And as I shook her hand, the towel fell. And she said, hi, I'm Larry. And she said, I'm Joan Baez.
Oh, wow.
So we laughed, got covered up. We went out to the pool, and she told everybody the story. Paul McCartney says, you are the worst kind of bad, Larry. So this was a thing that ran, I was the straight man for their comedy. Anyway, it was an amazing story, amazing to travel with them. This book was a labor of love for a long time, and I really think you'll enjoy it. If you have any questions, write to me at my website. Any questions?